It was a quiet night at the company headquarters. Most of the lights in the building were turned off, and only a few dim bulbs lit the long hallways. The security guard, a middle-aged man named Daniel, made his usual rounds. He was tall, with tired eyes but a gentle smile. He had worked there for years, guarding the place every night when the world outside slept. To many, he was invisible, just the man in uniform at the door. But tonight, something unusual was about to happen. In another corner of the building, a man in plain clothes was walking slowly, pretending to be just another staff member. Nobody knew he was actually the CEO of the entire company. His name was Richard. He had decided to spend a week undercover, without his expensive suit or his luxury car, just to see how life really was for the employees who worked at the bottom. He wanted to learn what people thought of the company, how they were treated, and what he might be missing from his office on the top floor. For years, he had heard reports and read numbers, but he felt numbers didn't tell the whole story. Tonight, he would discover something that no report could ever show him. As Richard walked through the empty halls, he heard a faint sound, the soft rustle of paper. Curious, he followed it and stopped near the lobby. There, behind the security desk, he saw Daniel hunched over a thick book. The desk lamp was broken, so Daniel had pulled out a small flashlight from his bag. He held it with one hand while scribbling notes with the other. His face looked focused, and his lips moved silently as if he was repeating the words he was reading. Richard stood quietly in the shadows for a moment, trying to understand what he was seeing. Most security guards passed time by watching TV, scrolling on their phones, or sipping coffee. But Daniel was different. He was studying late into the night, using nothing more than a weak flashlight. Richard felt a spark of curiosity. Why was a security guard spending his night reading textbooks? He leaned closer and noticed the title, Information Technology Fundamentals. Richard recognized it instantly. It was a certification guide for IT careers. That explained the thick pages filled with technical terms. Richard cleared his throat softly. Daniel looked up, startled, almost dropping the flashlight. "Oh, sorry," Daniel said quickly, closing the book as if he had been caught doing something wrong. His eyes showed fear. Security guards weren't supposed to do anything else while on duty. If his supervisor found out, it could mean trouble. "I was just reviewing some notes," Daniel added nervously. Richard smiled kindly. "No need to apologize. What are you studying?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if this man was someone who might report him. After a pause, he answered honestly. "I'm preparing for an IT certification exam. It's my dream to move into technology work. But I only get time to study at night, during my breaks." There was silence for a moment. Richard felt something stir inside him. He remembered his own early years, long nights in the library, working odd jobs, chasing dreams that seemed too far away. He saw the same determination in Daniel's eyes. This wasn't just about a book. It was about a man fighting quietly for a better life, while the world assumed he was nothing more than a guard in a uniform. "Isn't it hard to study here?" Richard asked gently. Daniel nodded. "Yes. The light is poor, and I get tired. But if I don't study now, I'll never be ready. My sister depends on me too. She's in college, and I help pay her fees. I want her to have the life I couldn't. That's why I'm pushing myself. Even if it takes years." Richard felt a lump in his throat. The man's words were humble, yet powerful. He didn't complain about long hours or low pay. He didn't blame anyone for his struggles. Instead, he carried quiet determination, choosing hope over despair. It was the kind of spirit that built companies, that fueled nations, yet often went unseen. Just then, a light flickered in the hallway. Daniel quickly pushed his book aside and stood up straight, back in full security guard mode. He glanced around nervously, afraid someone else had seen him. Richard understood. If a supervisor caught him, it could be written up as misconduct. Richard gave him a reassuring nod. "Don't worry. I won't say anything." Daniel relaxed slightly. "Thank you," he said softly. "I can't afford to lose this job." He looked down at his worn-out flashlight, then at the heavy book on the desk. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being foolish dreaming too big." Richard wanted to tell him right then and there who he really was. He wanted to promise him that his dream wasn't foolish, that someone had noticed his effort. But he held back. This was not the right moment. Instead, he asked, "When is your exam?" Daniel sighed. "In 6 months, but I don't even know if I'll be able to pay the fee. It's expensive. Still, I keep studying. One day, I'll figure it out." The CEO's heart sank. Here was a man giving his all, and yet something as small as an exam fee stood between him and his future. Richard thought of how easily the company spent thousands on a single dinner for executives, while this guard struggled to afford a few hundred for an exam. The difference was painful. Richard left that night with many thoughts racing in his head. He had come undercover to check operations. Instead, he had discovered a story of resilience and determination. He couldn't stop thinking about the image of Daniel bent over that book, flashlight in hand, fighting against fatigue and circumstance. On his way home, he whispered to himself, "This man deserves a chance. He deserves more than just my sympathy." The next morning, Richard sat in his office, staring out at the city skyline. He had the power to change things. He knew that. But the question was, should he step in personally, or should he first see how far Daniel could go with only encouragement? He wanted to help, but he also wanted to understand the depth of the man's willpower. One thing was clear, the encounter had already touched him deeply. It wasn't just about the guard anymore. It was about how many others like him might be hidden in plain sight, fighting unseen battles. And so, with a thoughtful heart, Richard made a quiet decision. He would watch Daniel closely, still undercover, and he would find a way to help without breaking the guard's dignity. He had no idea that this decision would soon lead to changes far bigger than either of them could imagine. That night, as Daniel returned with his flashlight and his heavy book, unaware that the CEO's eyes were still on him, he whispered to himself, "One day, just one day, I'll make it." Little did he know, that day was coming faster than he ever dreamed. The next evening arrived quietly, and the city outside was wrapped in darkness once again. Inside the office building, Daniel began his usual routine. He checked the entrances, tested the locks, and wrote notes in his small security logbook. Everything seemed ordinary, yet his mind was not at ease. The words from his short conversation with the night auditor still lingered in his thoughts. He was grateful the man had not reported him for studying, but he was still nervous. What if it happened again? What if someone less kind caught him? Still, he couldn't give up. He pulled out his flashlight and textbook once more, whispering, "I have to keep going." What Daniel didn't know was that Richard, the undercover CEO, had also returned. He carried with him 2 old training guides and a small power bank tucked inside his bag. They weren't expensive items, but he hoped they might make a difference. Richard walked casually through the halls, pretending to inspect the doors. When he reached the lobby, he noticed Daniel flipping pages carefully, his tired eyes blinking in the dim light. "Still at it?" Richard asked, smiling softly. Daniel quickly shut the book, embarrassed. "Yes, sir. I'm just reviewing a little." Richard placed the training guides on the desk gently. "These might help. They're from a friend who didn't need them anymore. And here's something so your flashlight doesn't die in the middle of a chapter." He slid the power bank across the desk. Daniel hesitated, looking at the items as though they were treasures. I can't accept that." It feels wrong. Richard shook his head. No, it's nothing. Everyone deserves a fair shot. Call it a small favor from a friend. The guard's eyes softened. He finally nodded and whispered, "Thank you. You don't know how much this means." As the night went on, Daniel shared more of his story. He explained how he worked not just as a guard but also part-time at a small store during the day. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't always afford. His paycheck barely covered rent, bills, and his younger sister's college tuition. "She's the reason I keep pushing," Daniel said quietly. "If she finishes her studies, she won't have to struggle the way I do. That's all I want." Richard listened closely, his heart heavy. Here was a man who sacrificed his own comfort and future for the sake of family. The CEO admired his loyalty and strength. He could see clearly now Daniel wasn't just studying for himself. He was carrying the dream of his sister too. But the path was not smooth. Later that week, Daniel's supervisor happened to walk by during rounds and noticed the books on the desk. "What's this?" the supervisor asked sharply. "You're supposed to be focused on security, not your homework." Daniel quickly stood up straight, hiding his panic. "I only read during my break, sir. I never let it distract me from duty." The supervisor frowned. "Company rules are rules. I'll let it slide this time, but don't push your luck. We don't pay you to sit and read." He walked away, leaving Daniel shaken. Richard, who had watched from around the corner, felt anger stir inside him. He wanted to step forward, reveal his identity, and defend the guard. But he held back. It wasn't the right moment yet. He wanted to understand how Daniel handled adversity, whether he would still push forward despite pressure. That night, after the supervisor left, Richard asked softly, "Are you okay?" Daniel forced a smile. "Yes. I can't let things like that stop me. If I get written up, I'll just study at home after my second job. It will be harder, but I'll find a way." Richard nodded slowly. He admired the determination, but he also felt a deep responsibility. He thought of all the talent that might be wasted in the company simply because no one ever noticed. How many other employees had hidden dreams, blocked only by a lack of opportunity? Back in his office the next day, Richard quietly reached out to HR under another name. He asked if there were any programs that supported employees' education. The answer he received was disappointing. Years ago, the company had paused its skills bridge budget due to cost cutting. No one had restarted it. Richard leaned back in his chair, frustrated. The company could easily afford such programs, yet it had abandoned them. Meanwhile, people like Daniel worked themselves to the bone, dreaming of a future that seemed just out of reach. But Richard wasn't ready to give up. He began searching through reports and old files until he found something useful: a proposal for relaunching the Skills Bridge program. All it needed was one strong example, one candidate who could prove that the investment worked. He thought immediately of Daniel. The plan was forming in his mind, but he had to move carefully. If he revealed himself too soon, the meaning of Daniel's journey might change. For now, he decided to help quietly, step by step. That evening, Richard returned to the building once more. Daniel was again at his desk, eyes heavy but focused. "Long night?" Richard asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Every night is long. But each page I finish makes me feel closer to the goal." Richard nodded, pretending to check the windows. Deep inside, he knew he had made his choice. He would not let this man's effort go unseen. He would find a way to make sure Daniel had the chance he deserved. And so, under the cover of another quiet night, the story of quiet help and hidden determination continued to grow. Neither of them could have imagined how far it would soon go, or how much it would change both of their lives. The following night brought a new test, one that neither Daniel nor Richard could have predicted. The building was quiet, as usual, But sometimes even in silence, unexpected events happened that revealed the true strength of a person. For Daniel, this night would become one of those moments where his patience, discipline, and character were put under the spotlight. It started with a simple flicker of the lights. At first, Daniel thought it was just a brief power surge, the kind that happened now and then in the old building. But then the entire hallway went dark for a few seconds before the backup lights kicked in. The security cameras went offline temporarily, and the lobby computer restarted slowly. For an ordinary worker, this would have been a minor annoyance. But for a security guard, this was a serious problem. Daniel had to keep the building safe, even when technology failed. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed his flashlight. He checked the emergency systems, guided a cleaning worker out of the elevator safely, and calmly reassured a delivery man who had entered during the outage. His movements were steady, his tone was calm, and he kept track of every detail in his notebook even as he managed the situation. Unseen by Daniel, Richard stood nearby, watching carefully. He had been in the building again that night, continuing his undercover work. To him, this wasn't just a blackout, it was a window into Daniel's true character. Many people would panic or freeze. But Daniel handled it with discipline and professionalism, proving that he was more than just a man studying on the side. He was someone who could be trusted under pressure. Yet, even after handling the crisis, Daniel's troubles weren't over. The next morning, his supervisor found a note about the flashlight used during the outage. Someone had reported that Daniel might have been distracted by personal reading material instead of focusing fully on his job. The complaint was unfair. Anyone who had seen him that night knew he had been focused on safety. But rules were rules, and now he was under scrutiny. When the supervisor called him into the small office, Daniel stood with his shoulders straight. "Yes, I was using a flashlight," he admitted. "But it wasn't for reading during duty. It was to manage the blackout. I take my responsibilities seriously, sir." The supervisor studied him carefully, then sighed. "I'll give you another chance. But remember, the company doesn't want distractions. If I hear about books or studying during your shift again, I'll have to write it up." Daniel nodded respectfully, though inside, worry gnawed at him. Every warning pushed him closer to losing the job that kept him and his sister afloat. Yet even then, he refused to give up. Later that evening, he told himself quietly, "If I have to study less here, I'll study more after my store shift. Sleep can wait. My dream can't." Richard, who had listened from the hallway, felt both anger and admiration. Anger, because the system cared more about rules than recognizing effort. Admiration, because Daniel's spirit remained unbroken even under pressure. The CEO knew this was the moment to act. He had been researching the old Skills Bridge program all day, and he had discovered that the company only needed one strong candidate to restart the initiative. Now, he had his proof. Daniel was that candidate. Richard began drafting a plan. The company would quietly invite Daniel to an internal pilot program. He wouldn't know it yet, but this would give him training resources and a chance to sit for the exam. To make it fair, Richard decided the invitation would come anonymously, as if from the HR department, not from him directly. That way, Daniel's effort would still feel earned, not handed out of pity. A few days later, an email was sent to Daniel's work account: "You have been shortlisted for a pilot employee development interview. Please report to conference room B, 3 p.m. on Friday." Daniel stared at the message in shock. He had never even heard of such a program. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Why would they choose him, a night guard, for any development program? He even considered deleting the email, fearing it was some kind of trick. But his sister, when he told her, insisted, "You should go, Daniel. What if it's real? You've worked so hard. Don't throw it away." On the day of the meeting, Daniel put on his cleanest uniform, straightened his tie, and walked nervously into the conference room. There, a small panel of managers sat waiting. Among them was the night auditor who had been so kind to him. Richard sat quietly at the corner of the table, still undercover. The interview began with questions that tested not just Daniel's knowledge, but his values. One manager asked, "How do you balance personal goals with company responsibilities?" Daniel answered honestly, "I never let my dreams interfere with my duty. My work here comes first. That's why I study only on my breaks. But I believe if employees grow, the company grows too." Another asked, "Why do you want to move into IT?" Daniel's voice was steady. "Because I believe technology is the future. I don't want to stay stuck in one role forever. And I want to give my sister a better life. If I can do this, she won't have to struggle like me." Richard felt a surge of pride as he listened. Daniel spoke with humility, but his words carried strength. He wasn't asking for favors. He was asking for a chance to prove himself. When the interview ended, the panel members exchanged looks. They were impressed. And Richard knew the moment was approaching when he would no longer stay in disguise. That night, as Daniel walked home under the dim streetlights, his heart was heavy with uncertainty. "What if they don't choose me? What if I fail?" he whispered to himself. But deep down, a small flame of hope had been lit. Someone, somewhere in that company, had noticed him. And soon, that hope would grow into something much larger than he had ever imagined. Friday afternoon arrived, and the small conference room in the company headquarters felt unusually tense. Daniel walked in nervously, his uniform neat, his shoes polished. He had never been invited to such a meeting before. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. Across the table sat three managers from HR and IT. On one side, quietly in the corner, sat the night auditor who had shown him kindness in the past. What Daniel still didn't know was that this man was actually Richard, the CEO. The interview began like a normal evaluation, with questions about responsibility, time management, and motivation. Daniel answered each with honesty, speaking from his heart rather than trying to impress anyone. He explained how he balanced long working hours with his dream of studying technology. He spoke about his sister and how he worked 2 jobs to support her education. The managers listened closely, nodding at his sincerity. Finally, one of them asked, "Why do you want this so badly?" Daniel paused. His voice was soft but firm. "Because I want to break the cycle. My father worked hard all his life and never had the chance to move up. I want to prove that with enough effort, someone like me can build a better future. And if I do it, maybe others will believe they can too." There was silence in the room. His words carried weight. Richard could see the admiration in the manager's eyes. He knew the time for secrets was over. Slowly, he removed his glasses and cap, straightened his posture, and spoke in a voice that was no longer casual but commanding. "Daniel," he said, "there is something you should know. I am not a night auditor. My name is Richard Lawson. I am the CEO of this company." The entire room froze. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, he thought it was a cruel joke. But then he recognized the firm tone and the quiet authority in Richard's voice. His heart raced. You're the CEO." Richard nodded gently. "Yes. I went undercover to learn what life is like for employees we don't always see from the top floor. That's how I met you. I saw you studying in the dark, fighting for a dream. And I knew right then that I couldn't stay silent." Daniel didn't know how to react. Shock, confusion, and gratitude all rushed through him at once. "Sir. I never expected," his voice trailed off. Richard leaned forward. "You've shown discipline, honesty, and determination. You didn't complain, even when things were unfair. You kept pushing forward, not just for yourself, but for your sister too. That kind of spirit is what we need in this company. Then came the moment that changed Daniel's life. Richard announced, starting immediately, the company will cover the cost of your IT certification exam. You will also receive paid study hours during your shift so you don't have to sacrifice your health. And for the next 3 months, you will rotate with our IT department as a trainee. If you pass your exam, a permanent position will be waiting for you. The managers around the table smiled, impressed by the bold decision. Daniel felt his legs weaken. He sat in silence, overwhelmed by emotions. His eyes grew moist, and for a moment, he lowered his head, unable to speak. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for believing in me. I won't waste this chance." Richard smiled. "I know you won't. This isn't charity, Daniel. This is recognition. You've already proven your worth. Now it's time for others to see it too." The news spread quietly through the building. Some staff members were surprised that a security guard had been chosen for such a program, while others felt inspired. A few even approached Daniel privately, telling him they too had dreams they had been too afraid to chase. That night, when Daniel went back to his post, his books were still on the desk, but now he studied with a different energy. The fear of losing his job had been replaced by hope and responsibility. He wasn't just studying for himself anymore. He was studying for every unseen worker who dreamed of something bigger. Richard, meanwhile, returned to his office with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized this was not just about helping one man. It was about changing the culture of the company. Too often, hidden talents went unnoticed simply because no one bothered to look. Daniel's story was proof that greatness could be found in the most unexpected places. As the night ended, Daniel whispered to himself while flipping through the pages of his book, "I will pass this exam. I will make everyone proud." And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The following months became a turning point in Daniel's life. From the moment the CEO revealed the truth and offered him the opportunity, everything felt different. But this new chance also came with new challenges. Passing the IT certification exam was not just about studying, it was about proving that all his sacrifices, late nights, and quiet battles had meaning. Every day, Daniel worked his usual night shift, but now he had dedicated study hours written into his schedule. The company even provided him with a small laptop and online training access. For the first time, he didn't have to sneak pages under a flashlight. He studied openly, with pride. His co-workers often passed by and smiled. "You'll make it," one of them said. "You're an example for all of us." At home, his sister noticed the change too. Daniel carried a different kind of energy. His shoulders were straighter, his voice more confident. He still worked at the small store part-time, but now he studied with hope rather than fear. She often sat beside him late at night, helping him review notes. "You've carried me all these years," she said once, her eyes full of gratitude. "Now it's my turn to cheer for you." Meanwhile, Richard kept a close eye on his progress. Though he had revealed himself, he didn't want to overwhelm Daniel. Instead, he checked in quietly, sometimes sending encouragement through short emails or dropping by during training sessions in IT. To Richard, watching Daniel grow felt more rewarding than any business deal he had ever signed. The exam day finally arrived. Daniel sat in front of the computer at the testing center, his palms sweaty. The questions were tough, full of technical terms that would have terrified him months ago. But he remembered all the nights of study, the mistakes he corrected, and the encouragement he had received. He took a deep breath and focused. Hours later, when the final screen appeared with the word pass, his eyes filled with tears. He covered his face with his hands, whispering, "Thank you, God. Thank you." When he returned to the office the next day, Richard was waiting for him in the lobby. "Well," he asked with a smile. Daniel grinned, holding out the certificate. I passed. In that moment, Richard didn't just see an employee. He saw a man who had fought every obstacle with quiet strength. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. Congratulations. From today, you're no longer just a guard. You're officially joining our IT department. The news spread quickly through the company. Many employees who had once overlooked Daniel now looked at him with admiration. Some even confessed, I used to think people like us could never move up. You've proven us wrong. The story of the guard who studied by flashlight became an inspiration. But the ripple didn't stop there. Richard took Daniel's success as proof that hidden talent was everywhere. He officially relaunched the Skills Bridge program, allowing employees from all departments to apply for education support, exam vouchers, and mentorship opportunities. Within months, dozens of workers, janitors, clerks, assistants signed up. For the first time, they felt seen. Daniel himself became a mentor. He still worked late hours, but now he wore a new badge, Junior IT Specialist. Sometimes, he would walk past the security desk where he once sat, flashlight in hand. He would smile, remembering those nights of struggle. Now, when he saw another guard or cleaner sitting quietly with a book, he would stop and say, keep going. Don't give up. Dreams don't stay in the dark forever. His sister, too, found strength in his journey. She graduated with honors, proudly telling her classmates, my brother is my hero. At the graduation ceremony, Daniel sat in the crowd, clapping until his hands hurt, knowing that every sleepless night had been worth it. And Richard? He often reflected on how a single decision to go undercover had changed not just one life, but many. He realized that leadership was not only about profits or policies, it was about noticing the quiet battles that employees fought behind the scenes. Daniel's story had reminded him of something he had nearly forgotten: humanity is the heart of every company. In the end, Daniel's life didn't just change because he passed an exam or earned a promotion. It changed because someone saw him, believed in him, and gave him the chance to shine. From a lonely guard studying by flashlight, he became a symbol of hope. And his journey proved one powerful truth: sometimes, the smallest light in the darkest hallway can inspire an entire building to see differently.